Welcome to this month's ITA webinar titled The Athlete Support Personnel Athlete Relationship in Clean Sport. My name is Nikki Hamblin. I'm an Olympian and member of the education team at the ITA. It is my pleasure to introduce the panelists joining us today. Firstly, Sára Mihalik. So Sára is a world and European champion in the sport of kayak. For many years, she competed for Hungary, and from 2022, she competed for the Finnish national team. Now, Sára is currently doing her internship with us in the ITA education team. So welcome, Sára, to the webinar.
Welcome all. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks, Sára. And our second panelist today is Sára's manager, Adam Favel. So Adam is the founder of DSE Sports, a coach, and himself a former competitive track and field athlete who is now based in British Columbia, Canada. Since entering the international sports world in 2017, Adam has built DSE Sports on an athlete-centric model, which focuses on authentic relationships, holistic support, and preparing athletes for success on the field and beyond. So welcome, Adam. It's great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so to get the most out of today's webinar, we were, as always, offering translation into Arabic, French, Russian, and Spanish. We will be launching poll questions for you to respond to. So as a reminder, your responses will be completely anonymous, so we encourage you to participate. At the end, we will answer your questions live, and you can write these at any time using the question button on your Zoom menu. And finally, we will be recording the session for those who can't join us live. So, as always, I'm pleased to offer our thanks to our official presenting partner, Inform Sport, whose support of these webinars allows us to deliver them free of charge to the clean sport community in 5 languages. Inform Sport is a global certification program for supplements that batch tests products for substances prohibited in sport. As supplement contamination continues to be one of the leading causes of inadvertent doping, we encourage athletes and athlete support personnel to check all products before use at sport.wetestYoutrust.com. So, on to today's topic. So, athlete support personnel, who we will interchangeably refer to as ASP during this webinar, a group which includes managers, play a crucial and influential role in promoting clean sport. Those that have a close and trusted relationship with an athlete make them vital sources of information and mentorship. The importance of an athlete having support extends beyond athletic performance. It encompasses mental, emotional, and ethical guidance, and, of course, includes an understanding of anti-doping rules. Before we hear the experiences of our panelists, Sára and Adam, today, we are going to take a look at what the social science research tells us about athlete vulnerabilities to doping. In 2022, the World Anti-Doping Agency published a descriptive report on sport stakeholders' beliefs about athlete doping vulnerabilities and related factors. The research project collated risk factors which could make an athlete vulnerable to doping. So we are going to look at some of these risk factors and on the flip side, introduce some protective factors by jumping into an activity that we're going to run via poll questions. And what we will do is present some different scenarios, and you in our audience get to vote as to whether you think this situation or scenario is a risk factor for doping or a protective factor against doping. So let's go to our first poll question, which is, I have access to tools and resources to support me to fulfill my anti doping responsibilities as an athlete. So let's launch a poll. And simply, you have to vote whether you think this is a risk factor for doping or a protective factor against doping. And the votes are coming in very quickly. I can see on the screen. And we do have a favorite in these answers. So I will give about 10 more seconds for anyone who would like to pop a vote in who hasn't done so already. Okay, so let's close the poll. So the research tells us that having tools and resources are a protective factor against doping. So tools and resources are important for athletes. And to give you an example, it is not an expectation for anyone to memorize the prohibited list each year, but everyone must know that it exists and have a tool or know how to check it. In this case, the tool or the resource that could support an athlete could be a national anti-doping organization, it could be a team doctor, or it could be a reliable online tool such as Global Dro. So knowing where to access trusted and reliable tools and resources is important for clean sport. Okay, let's move on to our second poll. And this scenario is an athlete who thinks that they say, my only goal is to compete at the Olympic Games, and this will define my success in life. So the possible options again are, is this a risk factor for doping or a protective factor against doping? You guys know how this works because it's our second one. The responses are coming in very quickly. So we'll give another 10 seconds for everyone who hasn't voted to pop their vote in. Okay, and we will close the poll. So the research tells us that if an athlete's identity is solely tied up in their sporting success, this can be a risk factor for doping. So having other goals in life, particularly for young athletes, are important for mental health and to prevent any temptation to consider a shortcut. Now, people who support an athlete have a role in supporting an athlete to see themselves as more than their sporting results and looking for ways to hold space for them to build an identity beyond athlete. Okay, let's go on to our third example. And this one is, I am the athlete everyone thinks will win. I am scared to lose and disappoint my family and my fans. And so, do we think this is a risk factor for doping or a protective factor against doping? Okay, 10 more seconds for everyone to pop their votes in. Okay, so let's close the poll. And the research in this area tells us that overwhelming pressure and a need to meet external expectations is a risk factor that could make an athlete vulnerable to doping. So it is important that an athlete has tools and support to manage this pressure. And we're going to pick this up very shortly with Shara and Adam. Okay, so our next poll question. My support network, so this could be a coach, parents, other athlete support personnel, could be friends, for example, have engaged with clean sport education. So is this a risk factor for doping or a protective factor against doping? Okay, so 10 more seconds for everyone to pop their votes in. Okay, and we will close the poll. And to talk about this one, if a support network has engaged with education, this is a protective factor against doping. So quite simply, if a support team knows the athlete's responsibility and understands the anti-doping rules, then they can support an athlete to fulfill their responsibilities in anti-doping. So practical examples of this could be things like reminding them to check a medication they're going to take if they have a cold, or reminding them to update whereabouts when they're away at a competition. And it's also important for athlete support personnel to understand potential vulnerabilities and protective factors, which is what we're here talking about today. So they can consider how they might respond and provide support. And of course, it is important for support personnel to know that 7 of the 11 anti-doping rules also apply to them. Okay, so the next one, and this one is, I underperformed in my last competition and my coach didn't speak to me for a week. So is this a risk factor for doping or a protective factor against doping? Okay, so we'll give 10 more seconds. And we will close the poll. Okay, and research shows that along with an athlete's peers, a coach is most influential when it comes to an athlete's doping-related decision-making. So this influence can prevent doping or facilitate doping, and this could even be unknowingly through a motivational climate that they create. Which means that if a coach doesn't speak to an athlete for a week after a poor performance, this could be a risk factor for doping. So it is really important that coaches and other athlete support personnel are there to support an athlete when they have success, but also when things don't go well. If an athlete is punished for underperformance, this can increase the vulnerability of an athlete to doping as they look to seek approval. Okay, and the final poll that we have today, and this one is, when things are hard, I have people I can turn to for support. So is this a risk factor for doping or a protective factor against doping? Okay, and we'll give 10 more seconds for any final votes. Okay, and we will close the poll. So having people that an athlete can turn to for support is a protective factor against doping. As we've kind of alluded to through the poll questions we've covered so far, support personnel are key to clean sport. This could be a coach, this could be a team manager, a friend, a parent, a psychologist. Having space for an athlete to share openly and honestly about how they're feeling and know that someone will listen to them is key to them feeling supported, which is a protective factor against doping in sport. So, in many of these scenarios, as I've spoken about, an athlete support team have a role in aligning their behaviors with protective factors against doping to develop and support a clean sport environment. This highlights the importance of the athlete support personnel relationship as it relates to clean sport and encompasses the ASP responsibility under the World Anti-Doping Code to positively influence athletes' behavior and foster anti-doping attitudes. So now I hope we've set the scene. I would like to invite Sara and Adam to turn on their cameras because they're going to share their experiences of the athlete ASP relationship in clean sport. So Sara, we're going to come to you first. As an athlete, what has been your experience of ASP support?
So I have worked with many support persons during my career. And unfortunately,
My experiences with ACPs have not always been positive. The main difference between Adam and the ASPs I had not so positive experience with is that Adam always stayed. It was always really hard for me to realize that some coaches were on my side only until I could get good results, And most of the athletes, I also had periods of my career when I was not performing good at all. Quite many periods like that, actually. And seeing that you only matters if you perform well pushes you even deeper. I was lucky to have Adam as my manager because he also showed me that I am much more than results. He stayed by my side in the difficult times too and helped me prove that I am strong enough to climb back to the top no matter how deep I have fallen, without any need of using substances, even in a physically so stressing sport like kayaking. I believe that even just one ACP like Adam can make a positive difference for an athlete.
Thank you, Sara. So Adam, you obviously had a really important role for Sara. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you see your role as an athlete support person.
Sure. Well, I see my role as an ASP as so much more than just focusing on performance or meeting expectations. Yeah, there's tasks and responsibilities I got to take care of in the process, but at the core of it, my role is really about providing full support. It's about helping the athletes I work with not only succeed in their sport, but in life as well. And for me, that means paying attention to their mental, emotional, and ethical well-being. Because, athletes face pressures that most people just don't understand. And part of my job is being there for them, to listen, to offer advice, and just be a steady presence when they need it most. And at the heart of all that is empathy. If you don't care about the person behind the athlete, they'll feel it, and that creates distance. But when you genuinely care, that's when you build a real connection, one where the athlete knows they're being valued for who they are and not just for their results. And honestly, that's what makes this role so rewarding for me.
Thank you, Adam. And I think, what you've both said links back to the whole or the core piece around, the person who is the athlete and how this is important all around in terms of athlete well-being, but also links back to the piece around, you know, a protective factor against doping. So Adam, I guess you've talked a little bit about what you do, but how do you get there with an athlete? So how do you build kind of these healthy and successful relationships with the athletes that you work with?
In my experience, the foundation of a healthy and a successful relationship between an ASP and an athlete is trust. You know, without trust, it's really tough to have an open, honest conversation. And honesty is where the real progress happens between an ASP and an athlete. Because when an athlete feels that they can open up to you, whether it's about their struggles, their goals, their dreams, or even something just like how they're feeling that day, if they've had a really tough day training and competing and such, you know, that's when you know you're building something meaningful. And along with trust, mutual respect plays an absolutely huge role, I think. It's not just about pushing an athlete for results or better performance. It's about showing the athlete you care about them as the whole person and not just as the competitor. And when you're able to show an athlete and prioritize their well-being and recognize that they got a future beyond sport, that's where the real connection starts to form. And once that trust and once that respect, that mutual respect are in place, it becomes a partnership. You know, that the athlete knows you're genuinely in their corner, that you're always supporting them there, not just for a single moments of success, but for the good and the bad moments, for everything, but their entire journey. And that's when the relationship becomes something truly impactful and where you can really make a difference as an ASP.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think being an athlete is not always, or a lot of the time, is not just about the gold medals. Sara talked about, you know, some of the hard times she's had in her career, but I'm yet to meet an athlete who hasn't had these kind of periods where things haven't been going their way. And, you know, during those points, it's so important that they have someone that they can go to, that they can talk to, and as you said, be honest about how they're feeling, and kind
100%.
of let it all out.
Oh, definitely.
So Sara, we talked about this or we mentioned this in one of our scenarios at the start, about this thing around pressure, and athletes throughout their careers experience lots of different types of pressure. Yourself included, I know, as we've had some conversations about this, but can you talk or share with our audience your experience of pressure, and then what your techniques were to kind of manage the pressure as well?
Yes, probably the biggest pressure I put on myself by always striving to do my trainings and races perfectly as all the other athletes do, and by devotedly wanted to achieve my goals. So that is also true that part of this urge to have results origin from the general mindset around me that one can only be valuable if he or she has good results. I also had to fight with the pressure of fundings. I could only receive, some financial support if I had results. And this pressure became bigger and bigger as I became an adult and wanted to be able to stand on my own feet. And also, as I became successful, I had more responsibilities. I started to get tested by the anti-doping system, for example, and had to provide my whereabouts strictly. Even so, I never used any banned substances. I still always had that subconscious anxiety that what if my supplements were contaminated, or if I forgot to add something to my whereabouts. Actually, as once it happened, I forgot to add my room number at the hotel to my whereabouts, and I received a whereabout failure. I wanted to be a good example for the next generation too. I wanted to promote clean sport, so I had to be really careful and know my responsibilities. So there are several external pressures an athlete needs to face, and Adam was always great in how to take those pressures off of me.
Thank you, Sara. I guess you mentioned a few different types of external pressure, from the performance side, the responsibilities side, and the growing responsibilities as well, particularly in the anti-doping, once I guess you progress through sport. So in her last line there, Adam, Sara mentioned you about how you're great at helping kind of take the pressures off her. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you did that, and how you support all the athletes that you work with to manage, you know, a variety of different pressures that they experience throughout their careers.
So supporting athletes like Sara at the international level means, I mean, the number of pressures that athletes face nowadays is it's quite something. You know, off the top of my head, you know, pressures from coaches, teams and clubs, national federations, international federations, sponsors, financial supporters, the public through social media, friends, family, and as one of the pieces that Sara said, they're also their own personal expectations. I mean, that is a heck of a lot of pressure that an athlete will sometimes deal with, sometimes a whole bunch of those at the exact same time. And it's really, really, really easy for it to become very overwhelming. And it's really easy for an athlete to lose sight of what truly matters in the process. And that's where my role as an ASP comes in. You know, I'm here to help an athlete navigate these external demands while staying focused on their personal goals, dreams, and overall well-being. And it's a fine balance. There are certain tasks in there that I can take over, you know, dealing with coaches, with clubs, federations and stuff. Those are sometimes some areas where I take over to go in and have conversations that ease the pressures in certain situations. Sponsors and financial supporters, as Sara knows from our experience, we were working side by side, trying to work on all the different angles to find those things. The public through social media, family, friends, these are places where we would have a lot of long conversations about these things, and giving a place for Sara to, as you said at the beginning, let it all out, to have a place, a sounding board, so that those pressures didn't just build up inside and go kaboom at one point, because that's what we never want it to happen. And it is a really, really fine balance, you know, and to remind an athlete of not just what they want as their goals and dreams in the sport, but also remind them about what they want beyond just their sport as well. So my job is to keep them grounded, keep their feet on the ground and remembering what they're working towards, and also ensure they're taking care of themselves mentally and emotionally. And it goes back to the piece that I'm constantly reminding myself as I work, and I think a lot of ASPs should remind themselves of, that athletes are more than just competitors. You know, they're people with lives outside of sport. And this means a lot of checking in on their well-being, offering support when things get tough. For me, especially working with athletes like Sara, who are based in a different time zone, meant a lot of very early morning phone calls and video calls, and, you know, being ready at whatever point that I was needed to help and assist, and offering support when things got tough. And there were definitely a lot of tough situations that we worked through, and constantly helping guide your athlete in the direction so they stay true to their values. You know, the key is kind of trying to find a way to balance the demands of the sport with the needs of the athlete as a person, so that you can help them push forward and thrive in their sport in a healthy and a sustainable way at the same time.
Thanks, Adam. So when Sara talked about some of the pressures, she also talked about some of these kind of specific pieces that came from the anti-doping system,
Yes.
you know, around whereabouts, you know, concerns about, you know, a potential contaminated supplement. So what do you see are your anti-doping responsibilities as an athlete manager?
As an athlete manager, my role in anti-doping is incredibly important, I think. Let's be frank, the pressure to dope or take shortcuts in the pursuit of success in international sport is unfortunately very, very real. And athletes often find themselves in some very difficult situations where they might feel tempted to compromise their ethics and values in the pursuit of success. And that's where ASPs can really make a difference. You know, we're in a very unique position to support athletes by educating them about anti-doping rules, helping them understand the complexities of the issues. You know, it's not just about knowing the rules, it's about understanding why those rules exist and why clean sport is so important. But education alone isn't enough. It becomes a situation where you're helping an athlete develop the confidence and strength to make the right decisions. You know, when external pressures push them in the wrong direction, we need to be there to reinforce their resolve, remind them of their values, and support them in staying true to themselves and their sport. When an athlete's going through such pressures and dealing with those difficult situations, being that rock in the background that's going to say, let's sit down, let's talk about this here, you got a safe place to talk, and to be able to remind them back with their values of what they've been always striving for all this time, can help them stay true to themselves and their sport at the same time. You know, in the end, I guess our goal is to make sure that athletes are not only informed, but that we've also empowered them to resist the temptation of doping and stay committed to clean sport.
And so maybe a follow-up question to that, because
Sure.
I think we often, ASP is a group of people which, you know, is coaches, is managers like yourself, is potentially parents, is, you know, psychologists. And so although you're one group, you kind of have quite different roles in terms of interaction, and I guess level of relationship potentially with an athlete.
Yes.
So for example, you mentioned that you're on the other side of the world from Sara. So you're not having kind of daily face-to-face contact. But I guess, how do you see, under this ASP umbrella, do all ASP have the same responsibilities? Is there different responsibilities in that? I guess, how do you see that as kind of the entire support ecosystem of an athlete, or for an athlete?
So when an ASP and their team fully understand the rules and responsibilities around clean sport, they're always in a much better position to help an athlete meet those standards. Excuse me. Each member of a support team, whether it's managers, coaches, medical professionals, the people you listed, we all play an important role. And while our duties might differ, we all share the same goal, which is protecting the integrity of the sport and ensuring that our athletes compete fairly. And by understanding anti-doping regulations, we can educate athletes and guide them through the pressures they face from the external sources. And so when we as a team, all these different individuals, create an environment where an athlete feels supported and confident in making the right choices, well, it's an absolutely key thing. And when they understand the rules, the ASPs and the team members, and when the athletes understand the rules, they're more empowered to navigate a difficult situation. And I guess in the end, when everyone on a team understands that they do have a responsibility as part of this process based on the duties that they have within, based on their specific role, together we're able to support the athlete in staying informed, confident, and ethical, even when the external pressures are at their highest.
Yeah, great. You know, I really like that answer, and I really like that key message as well. I mean, it's everyone's responsibility. It's everyone who is around the athlete has a responsibility in this regard. So Sara, maybe to come back to you, what, I guess, key advice do you have for athlete support personnel who want to, I guess, better support athletes, or want to improve what they're doing, or to further build the clean sport environment that they're part of?
Yes, so first of all, I would say that thanks to ACPs around me, like Adam, my parents, and some others also, I could understand early enough that results are not the most valuable sports can give. And also that doping or any kind of cheating simply destroys these values and the athletes themselves. Then I realized my responsibilities as an athlete in anti-doping, but For all these, I needed a solid background, ACPs around me to help me stay on the right track. And also never forget as an ASP or as an athlete that success is collaborative. We all need the help of other people. None of us could get far alone. So be there for each other, for the good and the bad times also. And last but not least, I believe that if athletes would all deeply feel that results are not the most important, that they are stronger than they think they are, and that they have opportunities in life outside of sports too, then there would be less of use of doping substances and methods. So help the athletes feel this and build a clean sport environment.
Thank you, Sara. Yeah, some really nice insights and advice there for our audience. So Adam, maybe just to come back to you, what advice do you have for others, for other athlete support personnel? And also if you can bring in any practical examples as well, I'm sure that would be appreciated.
So to put into action some of the stuff that Sara mentioned there, it really comes down to an athlete-centric approach. You know, the best ASPs, we go beyond handling logistics or day-to-day tasks. We essentially invest in the athlete's entire journey. So that means we're supporting them through their early career, their highs, their lows, the wins, the losses, the great moments, the everything's falling apart moments. And we're there even after their sporting career ends. You know, it's about helping them succeed as people, not just athletes. Sara made a really important point there actually about success not being defined solely by results. And I really couldn't agree more, because doping or cheating ultimately harms the sport and the athlete. And my role goes beyond guiding athletes through their performance. It's about helping them make choices that will benefit their future, personally and professionally. I encourage the athletes I work with to see their potential beyond sport and remind them that they are so much more than their achievements. And again, at the heart of everything I do is putting the athlete's well-being first, both on and off the field. You know, advocating for their mental health, helping them navigate the pressures, ensuring they feel valued as whole people and not just for their results. And to make this approach effective, I'll go back to the points I kind of said at the beginning there. Strong communication and empathy are key. I listen carefully, especially when my athletes are having setbacks or feeling isolated. I said long conversations with Sara and the other athletes I've worked with in the past about when these moments happen, because these moments of vulnerability can increase the risk of unhealthy choices. And so being there to offer that emotional support to help them work through these things, make the right decisions, push forwards in what they're doing, or just push forward in whatever direction they want to go is so really important. And creating that strong connection, it takes time. I'm going to be straight. To build trust, to build that relationship takes time. It's not something that just magically appears in 2 seconds. No, trust takes time to build, just like we would with a friend or someone else, any other aspect of our life. And as an ASP, to really create that strong relationship, you really got to put the time in, especially in this industry where it's hard sometimes to, what's the word I want to say here? It's hard to sometimes trust people's, not demands, that's not the word I'm looking for there. Hard to trust what their motivations are sometimes. And so ultimately, our goal is to create an environment as ASPs where an athlete can and will feel supported and empowered to succeed in a clean, ethical, and in a sustainable way. And so by helping them realize that they are stronger than they think, and that there is a life beyond sport and they have opportunities beyond sport, we can both reduce the temptation of doping and also set up an athlete for long-term success after their sport career is finished.
Thank you, Adam. So I think it's clear from what we have talked about today in the limited time that we do have that the athlete support personnel relationship is really key for clean sport. We've mentioned a lot today about the vulnerability moments that athletes can and do experience throughout their careers, and the importance of having athlete support personnel who are both aware of these types of moments and understand their role in providing support and beyond just knowing rules and regulations. So just before we do jump to Sara to give her the last question that I have, I would like to encourage you, we do have the Q&A box open, so if you have any questions for Adam or Sara, please do pop them in there because we will come to those in just a moment. But before we do go to our live Q&A, Sara, I think it's clear that Adam has been a really important person to you throughout your sporting journey. So is there anything that you would like to say to Adam?
Yes, of course, and thank you for the opportunity, Nikki. So Adam, as you well know, I have had to overcome many difficulties in my sporting career, and also, unfortunately, I'm still haunted by the thoughts that I could not achieve all the results I was capable of. But in the meantime, I have had some very precise and valuable moments, and even could have some results too. But it's just so true that I couldn't have done it without you. So thank you for helping to make my career a good one overall. And thank you for never leaving me.
Thank you. And Sara, I just want to say I'm so absolutely proud of you for everything you've accomplished up to this point here, both on the sporting field and off of it as well. And like I said, it's just like you said, you've gone through a hell of a lot of things. I mean, a lot of things some athletes would never want to go through. And all the changes and the ways we had to adapt throughout it as you continued on. I mean, heck, you've had quite a journey to say the least, and I'm really honored to have been able to take the journey with you and to be there for you in that fashion there. And and I hope that more athletes get that opportunity to work with people around them that have that support behind them, because in this very results driven international sports world that we work and are in, that aspect of humanity and being there for someone does get lost along the way. And so I really hope that, as I'm just so proud to have been able to be alongside you on yours.
Thank you, Adam. I wish all the athletes have someone like Adam beside them.
Thank you, Sara, and thank you, Adam, for sharing your story or part of your story, and for your honesty and willingness to share this with us today. So we will now go to our live Q&A. We have a question in the Q&A box, which I think, Adam, relates to, you talked about the results, or the often results-driven space of elite sport. And I think this question relates to that. And it's from Kashif, who says, what ethical considerations should athlete support personnel keep in mind with athletes who may be under pressure to perform at all costs? So do you have a comment, feedback, response to that one?
An athlete that's under pressure to perform at any cost is always a very, very delicate situation, because sometimes, no matter how much support you give or how much you're there for, that you still sometimes will have a situation where the pressure can be so much. In those situations there, the ethical considerations is you got to go back to the humanity for a second there in those situations. And you got to be willing to talk about these things as a person to person, as a human to human there. And it is for these kind of situations, it's not a quick fix. You know, it's not a changing an athlete's mentality from I must perform at any cost and there's no if, ands, or buts about it, to bringing them towards a more moderate mindset about it. It's a long-term process that just constantly reminding and constantly supporting throughout the entire point there, over and over and over and over again. Just constantly reminding them, as a person here, you are more than just your performances. You're more than just what it is that you're currently thinking is your situation there. And for an athlete, when they're in that mindset of that I must perform because nothing else matters, it is probably one of the toughest situations, I think, for an ASP to deal with. And it is just because in some ways, one thing I guess we forget sometimes is that the amount of sacrifice that an athlete has done throughout their life to get to that point, right? You forget that, well, you sometimes have to remind yourself of the years and years and years that they have put into this point. And so you have to, it's a kind of a gentle reminder cycle over and over and over to eventually lower the pressure level down for that athlete there. So at least they can get to a point where they're not looking at it as I have to perform at any cost. And so in terms of the ethical side of it there, I think the main ethical side of it there is you got to take from the approach of looking at the athlete as this is the human side of it more than anything, the human and the emotional side of it, because those are the two sides of it that get lost when you have an athlete that is in that mindset of must perform under any cost. Those are the two sides that get affected the most. Those are the two sides that get lost along the way. And so when you're constantly reminding the athlete of those two sides, that's where you can slowly chip away at that pressure level so that you can get to a more moderate and a easier to handle pressure level for that athlete, so that they're not thinking this is the be all end all. If I mess up, you know, bad things happen, kind of thing. Yeah.
Thanks, Adam. Sara, I saw you nodding your head at a few points during Adam's answer. Is there anything that you would like to add on to what Adam said or reiterate as really key points?
Yes, maybe just that yeah, you can say anything to an athlete, but the main thing is how you really feel, because the athlete will feel it too. And if an athlete deeply feel it and understand it, that it's not the results that matter. Of course, we are working for results and we are very happy together to get results, but it's not the results that are most valuable one can gain from sport. And an athlete can only feel it and understand it if people around the athlete feel and understand it deeply. I don't know how you can teach it to an ACP. Maybe there's no way to teach it if someone just doesn't feel that way, but maybe it's good to remind each other all the time in the world of sport, when everything is about results, that it's not the results that matters. And if the ACP will feel it, the athlete will feel it. At least that's what I experienced with Adam.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sara. So our next question is from Loai, and they've said, what should I do if I accidentally took a doping substance? So my response to you, Loai, would be to perhaps flick us an email, education@ita.sport, if you would like to tell us more about whatever this situation is. I think that would be the best way to go forward with your question there. We have, I think, a follow-up from Kashif again, or a follow-up, and they've said, what challenges do athlete support personnel face when advocating for clean sports, especially in high-stake competitions? Adam, I will come to you to, I guess, get your thoughts on that one.
Lots of them. One of the pieces that, as Sara kind of said there too, is that we do live, international sports world is unfortunately highly defined by results. And trying to convince other stakeholders sometimes to compete fairly and cleanly sometimes is difficult because of the fact that it is such a results-driven industry. It's funny, I was thinking about this morning actually there, and if we think about it, an athlete and the majority of people around them there, the teams, the ASPs, the federations, their coaches, it's kind of a very weird symbiotic relationship in a way, in that the athlete is kind of carrying all of us, and we rely on the athlete in a way, in terms of our own well-being, our own jobs, our own everything. Everyone relies on that athlete, and sometimes because of that, you have this kind of trickle-down effect of pressure, I think. And unfortunately, it's not like the usual trickle-down effect, where it's like it gets less as you get to the bottom. It's almost the vice versa, where the pressure just groups all together and goes on to the athlete. And so advocating for some of these other levels to understand that to compete cleanly and to compete fairly and stuff can sometimes be very difficult, because sometimes, in some ways, everyone's livelihood in some way relies on the athlete, and we like to forget that sometimes. And so because of that, being willing to stand up for a clean sport and advocate for it can be quite a challenge in certain situations when everyone's kind of thinking about their own necks. So to properly advocate for it at times there, you kind of got to be willing to step outside the box and, again, stand with your athlete and understand, again, that athlete's more than the name on the piece of paper or the number that's tied to them on that time or that result at that point. They're more than that person there. And so as an ASP, you got to be willing to stand with them and to be willing to say sometimes, to have those hard conversations with people above them who may not see things the same way as you do. And it's a challenge for sure. And with the results-driven industry that this is, it is one that's going to take a while for the mindset to change around, I think. But it's just trying to think the way I want to say this last part of it. It can be done. And it just takes a very, I wouldn't say strong, but you actually just really have to believe in what you're trying to do here with the advocates, in terms of wanting your athletes to compete clean and understanding, again, that athlete's a person. And when you get to that point of it there, I think you can really advocate strongly and deal with the challenges that will come from higher above you.
Thanks, Adam. Sara, anything that you would like to add on?
Yeah, I find it very important when Adam said that well, the SCPs rely on the athletes, and that it really actually puts more pressure on the athletes, because I always told them that I never felt that I could give enough back to him. He gave so much for me, but I never felt that I could give enough back, and that also was a pressure on me. Many times an athletes can feel when the ACPs want something from the athlete, and it's really not good when coaches are focusing on their own results through the athletes, and that's not a healthy thing. That will destroy the athletes and the athletes' performance for sure.
Thanks, Sara. I'm going to skip a question, but Deborah, I will come back to you. Danielle has said that Adam, she loves your answer on the trickle-down effect of the athlete's results being tied to the performance of the support personnel. And the question was, Sara, how do you feel this as the athlete, and then how did you handle it? I think you've obviously mentioned a lot about the support that Adam has given you, but is there anything there that you would like to extend on or expand on?
Yeah, maybe just a few more sentences, because I know that many athletes feel this way, that many times I felt like that I was not working for myself, but for the people around me. And I really, I was in a lucky situation that I received a lot of support from my parents, from ACPs around me, like Adam, or my personal trainer, or massage therapist, or my partner. And I always, many times I was racing for them. And yeah, that I just wanted to say that feeling that they don't really cared about the results, they were always. My mom always thought that even when I was the last one, they always thought that I was the best on the on the field, you know. And feeling this really helped me. For example, staying clean and not feeling the urge to use substances.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sara. I think your mum might be in the audience. So go Sara's mum. And if there's any parents in the audience as well, be like Sara's mum.
Yeah, hi, Mom.
The cheerleader all the time.
Yeah, she's my #1 fan.
Okay, so I think we do have time for one more question. So we're going to go to Deborah's question, which I skipped over and said I would come back to. So Deborah says the pressures of athletes, especially elite athletes, are tremendous, especially, and this is the interesting part, if there's contracts and money involved with performance clauses. So I guess that's the statement piece to it. And the question is, what training for athlete support personnel can you recommend for coaches and other support personnel, particularly those who are perhaps new to their career as an athlete support person? Adam, any thoughts on, or any recommendations around, I guess, training for that?
Money complicates everything, doesn't it? I mean, that's especially when it comes to this particular level of sport, where, let's be frank, the funding and the support and the financial support can sometimes be really hard to come by. I think in this kind of situation, you got to drop the money part out of the equation when you're dealing with your athlete. If you start bringing in, trying to remind an athlete about performance clauses and money involved and things like that, and there are people that do that. There's enough people in that athlete's life that will remind him of that. And the athlete will remind themselves of that too, I'm pretty sure, a lot of the time as well. And so you, as an athlete support person, you got to push that part out of the way when you're working with your athlete. You just have to. If you're going to go and add these little extra pressures into the mix alongside what you're doing, alongside all the other listed pressures that I said at the beginning there, I mean, that's not healthy, and it doesn't really help anything. So in terms of a training for an ASP or a coach in that situation there, I think the best training is keep that stuff to the side. It's kind of when an athlete signs a contract, or you explain to them how a contract is structured and what performance clauses, they know that information already. So bringing it up or having to think about it on a constant basis for an athlete just doesn't help anything. And it becomes so counterintuitive to the entire process of the athlete's development, because at the end of the day, a performance clause is completely based on how the athlete performs. And if you're hampering their performance by reminding them of a performance clause, or reminding them of this is what's tied to this and this and this and this, it just doesn't do anything. It doesn't help. It doesn't, it just adds more and more pressure. And so I think the best training in that situation is just to train yourself as the coach to keep that stuff out of the way and out of the side while an athlete's trying to perform, and do your best to just consistently stick to the human side of it there. Because as an international athlete, things like this, when it comes to performance clauses and the large amounts of funding and sponsors and stuff like that come into play there, that's an added it's definitely an added pressure. I mean, the sponsors and stuff that we sometimes worked with Sara and with other athletes as well, let's be frank, some of them are demanding. Some of them are have some very interesting ideas of what they should be getting back for the money they're bringing in. And it's such a complicating factor into things. And so as the ASP, I think in some ways your job is kind of to insulate the athlete from those things so that they're not thinking about them. And so acting as that insulating force for them is probably the most important training I can say to do there. And so that they don't have to think about it. Because if they are thinking about it with all the other pressures and all the other expectations, personal expectations, expectations of others, all the things we've listed previously and such there, it doesn't work well. It does not work well at all.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sara. Thank you, Adam, for answering all the questions, both I guess the ones that I had, but also the ones that our audience have asked as well. We do have a question left, but I will ask Kashif if you would like that question answered, perhaps just to flick us an email, because we are just running slightly over time. On this next slide, we have collated a set of anti-doping resources related to today's topic. And of course, you will receive the slides after the session today. But as we are out of time, we will have to wrap up today's webinar. As I mentioned, if to Kashif, who had a question in the Q&A, if anyone else does have a question, a follow-up question from our webinar today, or really a question about clean sport or anti-doping, you're always welcome to reach out to us at education@ita.sport. So a big thank you again to Adam, to Sara. It's been great having you on our last webinar of 2024, and we hope that you and our audience found it valuable and enjoyed it. So again, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing everyone again in 2025.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.